Chapter 236. It was a bright red moonlight silk with golden embroidery. The hard silk on the shoulders spread out layer by layer like flower petals, slanting down along the shoulders. The middle of the lapel converged below the belt between the chest and abdomen, as well as the wide-sleeved skirt. The golden outline of the 9 heavens flying phoenixes was exquisite and beautiful, vivid and lifelike, as if it would fly out of the dress at any time. The luxurious golden color, together with the brilliant red moonlight, complemented each other, like a wedding dress flowing in the sky. The arms were covered with an extremely soft and thin scarlet mermaid gauze, which flowed down the back of the wedding dress and overlapped with the more than 3 feet of moonlight on the ground, dragging on the ground. 3 pure golden phoenix belts were tied around her waist, overlapping each other, perfectly outlining her exquisite figure. Jingwan's hands were naturally crossed in front of her lower abdomen. Her clear and bright eyes, long eyelashes, exquisite makeup, and lips were not that kind of intense red or dark pink, but looked soft and beautiful with a slight smile. Even if it was not the most beautiful color at this moment, it gave people a feeling that the most beautiful woman in the world was just this. Even though the wedding dress was only red and gold, it was unusually gorgeous. It was not known whether it was the dress that set off Jingwan's temperament, or Jingwan that supported the elegance of the dress. Perhaps it was because the two complemented each other that this was a wedding dress that belonged to Jingwan, one of a kind. The production of moonlight silk was extremely low. In the past it had never appeared in bright red. As for the wedding dress, a woman would only wear it once. Because it was the only time she would wear it, it was very precious. However, because it was only once, no one would waste the best things. They probably never even thought about it. But Li Hongyuan did so. To specially weave a bolt of bright red moonlight silk, and the golden thread used for embroidery, all of which required a considerable amount of manpower. Therefore Li Hongyuan just did his best to give Jingwan the best, even if it was only once. Lady Quan Fu helped Jingwan put on the phoenix coronet. It was also made of pure gold and was divided into 2 parts. The top part of the coronet was connected by several golden twigs. In the middle of the front section there was a peony. It wasn't that kind of extremely lifelike appearance but more like a relief sculpture. 2 flying phoenixes had their heads facing inwards as if they were holding the peony in their mouths. Their bodies extended outwards in a graceful posture. There were several tassels at the front, and at the bottom, there was a golden pearl the size of a grain of rice hanging in front of the forehead. Jingwan, who was fully dressed, looked so beautiful. Not to mention her relatives and friends, even Madame Luo and Jingwan's grandmother were very satisfied with Jingwan's outfit. As a woman, she did not have many pursuits. The phoenix coronet, the robe, and the 10 miles of red makeup were even regarded as the greatest honor by many women. Jingwan didn't have much affection for her grandmother and they weren't close. However, the intimacy between Jingwan and Madame Luo made him very envious. Why didn't he have such a smart and well-mannered granddaughter? Naturally, he also felt regretful that Jingwan was estranged from her because of objective reasons. On the other hand, how could his stupid daughter give birth to such an exquisite child? It had nothing to do with her at all. She was simply lucky. Madame Zhang was complacent about this, but she was beaten back to her original position by the words, "not close to you." If some people were satisfied, there would naturally be others who were dissatisfied and even jealous. How could different people have different fates? Not to mention other things, just the dowry alone was priceless. You might have its own money but you wouldn't even be able to touch it. The sound of gongs, drums and firecrackers also announced the arrival of the bridal sedan. The Luo family's half-closed door was blocking the sedan door. It would only open after enough red packets were stuffed in. The bridal sedan was stopped with the door facing outwards. The child holding the sedan came down from the sedan. Then Madame Wang held a burning red candle in one hand and a mirror in the other. She began to search the sedan. She shone the light into the sedan to expel the ghosts hidden in the sedan to avoid bad luck. In order to escort the bride, Li Hongyuan had found almost half of the young talents in the capital. They were capable of both civil and martial arts. They could climb up a volcano 80 li long and also dive into a sea of fire 800 li long. At this moment, the Luo family had not yet begun to block the door, but a few makeup hastening poems had already been read out. The Luo family's people blocking the door were caught off guard. Were they going to be led by the nose by the other party? This was absolutely intolerable. They were the ones blocking the door, so they should be the ones to set the rules. One had to know that there were definitely a lot of people blocking the Luo family's door, and they were all of high quality. Not only did the Luo family's young masters call their friends, but there was also Luo Shangshu. In order to make things difficult for the pig who had stolen their family's fresh jade cabbage, they had secretly invited helpers. As a result, these two groups of people were simply at odds with each other. If the surrounding lively atmosphere was disregarded, this was simply an exceptionally top-notch literary battle feast. Li Hongyuan was wearing a bright red wedding dress, which was naturally of the same origin as Jingwan's clothes. Speaking of which, the world had never seen him in red. In fact, the most handsome man was indeed the most handsome man. Even if he was wearing red, it was still not a problem. The collar was quite similar to Jingwan's clothes, but the hard silk was spread out parallel to the shoulders. The clothes were embroidered with auspicious clouds and golden dragons, and the waist belt was like a golden dragon. The purple gold crown on his head was replaced with a red jade crown, and it was also inlaid with a huge golden pearl. He was tall and straight and extraordinarily handsome. Because it was a joyous occasion, Li Hongyuan's rare patience was not bad. However, there was also a limit to this, because some people were too engrossed in the battle, and were too excited as if they had forgotten what the occasion was. Li Hongyuan stepped forward and stood between the two groups of people. The original battle of words came to an abrupt end. They looked at each other, and some people even became timid and quietly retreated a few steps, reflecting on whether they had gone too far just now. Speaking of which, to stop the living king of hell from getting married, did they want to die or did they want to die? However, on a day like today he shouldn't hold a grudge, right? And the people who helped Li Hongyuan escort the bride looked at each other in dismay. Well, they had worked so hard just now, but in the end, it wasn't as useful as this one who stepped forward. Speaking of which, with Jin Qinhuang's imposing manner, he completely didn't need their help to marry his wife, right? Well, in that case it probably couldn't be called a marriage but a proper kidnapping of the bride. That in fact it's about time. It's better to get out of the way earlier. Facing the living king of hell there was no pressure, what was more needed was courage. However, at this time two little guys, one boy and one girl, came out from behind the adults and stood in front of Li Hongyuan, calling out crisply, "Brother-in-law." Perhaps because he was pleased by this address, or perhaps because the other party was a child, Li Hongyuan's face softened a bit. His reputation was a bit rotten, but it wasn't to the extent that he was famous among the children. Moreover, people who were good-looking naturally had an advantage. Thus, the two children raised their small faces to look at him and weren't frightened. However, the appearance of the two children made everyone realize that they were merely the descendants of Luo Shangshu. They were simply as treacherous as him. No matter how deranged the living king of hell was, it was possible for him to lay his hands on children, not to mention the bride's younger brother and sister. Sure enough. Li Hongyuan stretched his hand behind him, and then several red envelopes were placed in his hand. Li Hongyuan didn't look at how much it was, and directly divided it into two and handed it to them. At this moment many people were envious. The people who had just received the red envelope had already seen it. Inside the red envelope were either gold notes or silver notes. There were 2 notes with a value of 100. Just imagine if they had a few more red envelopes with gold notes, it would simply be a windfall. They had never seen such a generous, knocking fee. "Thank you, brother-in-law," the 2 children said in unison, and then the girl continued, "Although we received brother-in-law's red envelopes, we still can't make way for brother-in-law. Brother-in-law has to answer a few questions first." Li Hongyuan actually didn't have a good impression of children, but today was a bit of an exception. He nodded and said, "Okay. We like third sister very much. Third sister has been married by brother-in-law. What should we do if we miss her? You can go to the Wang mansion to see her at any time. Grandmother loves third sister the most. What should we do if grandmother misses third sister? Your third sister can come back to see her at any time. But you can go to the Wang mansion for a short stay from time to time. Your third sister can also come back for a short stay." Li Hongyuan said neither lightly nor heavily. "Isn't it said that a married girl can't casually return to her maternal home? It's against the rules." On this issue, Ben Wang is talking about the rules. Very good, this was very Li Hongyuan, very much like a living king of hell. Other men couldn't say this kind of thing. In the family, in this aspect, they, as children and grandchildren, never had the right to speak. These words were naturally passed to the rear courtyard word for word. Many people teased Jingwan with good intentions. Jingwan sat on the bed and smiled without saying a word. This kind of words, in fact, was not beyond her expectations. In this aspect she seemed to have a bit of inexplicable confidence. Who gave her this confidence? Naturally, it was the man who was going to marry her. Jin Qinhuang is really good to Biaomei. However, as a descendant of the heavenly crown, To personally escort the bride is the most surprising. Jingwan faintly glanced at her. Should it be said that this Gu family's young lady still hadn't given up? She always popped out from time to make her presence known, but it wasn't to make a good impression, but to make a bad impression. The other people in the room also looked over. The way they looked at Gu Xiaomei was a bit subtle. Their eyes clearly wrote, "Where did this brainless person come from?" In this world, the only person who didn't need to personally escort the bride was only one person, and that was the Son of Heaven. Even so, he would arrange a grand ceremony to escort the bride. Other than that, even if it was an imperial prince or Qinhuang, what could they do? Unless from the beginning, they didn't put their wife and her family in their eyes, or even extremely despised them and completely didn't worry about offending them. How could they dare to do this so openly? The average person's brain was flooded with water. Gu Xiaomei blushed and lowered her head. She seemed to be at a loss. Jingwan chuckled. She felt that this one wasn't so embarrassed that she couldn't show her face, but was excited being watched by so many people. She only cared about enjoying, and didn't notice the true meaning of the surrounding people's gazes. "Chow Chow, you helped me block the door last time. Hurry up and go block the door for Jingwan." A male phoenix seeking a female phoenix. Yuan Xiao Xiao was stunned at first. She didn't know how the fire had spread to her head, but then she understood. She put her hands on her waist and said very straightforwardly, "I'm not going." How desperate would she be to block the living king of hell? A male phoenix seeking a female phoenix? The others covered their mouths and laughed. However, after a while, the sound of a zither came from outside. It wasn't a male phoenix seeking a female phoenix, and it wasn't even a song they were familiar with. However, although there was a sentimental and melancholic sound, there was something else. It was domineering, irresistible, and directly hit people's hearts. Jingwan was in a daze. Perhaps it was because the zither music was specially played for her. Even if the zither music expressed a relatively illusory mood, she and Li Hongyuan were like Zhong Ziqi and Boya. He could give her a piece of the sky, give her everything she wanted, and the only requirement was that she didn't leave him. Do you know what kind of promise you are giving? I didn't think that Jin Qinhuang's zither skills would have such attainments. That's right, he's not a nobody. That young woman quickly shut her mouth and carefully glanced at Jingwan. Are you sure it's Jin Qinhuang playing the zither? After all, as a native of the capital, she had never heard that Jin Qinhuang was good at the zither. However, Jingwan's servant girl very cleverly went out to take a look, and then came in with a smile. Obviously, from her expression, she knew that it was Jin Qinhuang playing the zither. Moreover, it was definitely him who wanted to play the zither, and others didn't dare to mention it. What was this? Jingwan swept a glance. She also hadn't heard a certain person play the zither before, but she wasn't surprised. However, seeing that almost all of them had an expression of "3 views have been refreshed," it was quite amusing. "Miss, the time has come." Thus, the bridal veil embroidered with southern beads covered her beautiful face. Jingwan bid farewell to her parents, thanking them for the grace of raising her. This time, Zhangshi was truly choked with sobs, sobbing and choking as she exhorted. Jingwan felt that she was actually a cold-hearted person. She just quietly listened, and was even a little glad that her face was covered, otherwise she might not be able to continue pretending. If it was grandmother sitting here instead, grandmother, she wouldn't cry. Just as Luo Jingbo was about to carry Jingwan out, Li Hongyuan went straight forward and carried Jingwan in his arms. Almost everyone cried out in surprise. Jingwan was also a little startled and the veil almost slipped off. Jingwan hurriedly put one hand around Li Hongyuan's neck, and one hand pressed down on the veil. If the veil fell off now, it would be inauspicious. Jingwan was about to open her mouth to say something, but then she remembered that she couldn't speak right now, so she kept silent. The most dumbfounded was probably Luo Jingbo. Wang Yi, this is against the rules." "Ben Wang is the rules." Wan was served by a group of women all day long and taken advantage of, but that was because she couldn't do anything. She couldn't do everything herself, but other men were definitely not allowed to touch her. Don't mention brothers, even Laozi was not allowed. What he said was the rules, he was the rules. Alright, Jin Qinhuang, who was in his overbearing king of hell mode, didn't need to say anything. Along the way, seeing Jin Qinhuang carrying the bride out, everyone was stunned. Li Hongyuan's every step was very steady, so Jingwan was at ease to let him carry her. The other party didn't abide by the rules, but she wasn't a person who was bound by rules and regulations. The door of the sedan was opened, and Li Hongyuan carried her inside. "There's food behind the seat, Wan, eat a bit to fill your stomach." Under the veil, Jingwan's eyes were slightly bright. She had to say, Li Hongyuan's thoughtfulness made her happy. Raise the sedan, all the personnel were in place, the sound of gongs and drums filled the sky, and firecrackers sounded again. Although it wasn't moonlight silk, it was still a first-class colored silk. The two sides were embroidered with red phoenixes facing the sun, while the front was a picture of 100 children. The top of the sedan was unusually gorgeous. Not to mention the carved cornices inlaid with gold and decorated with gems, the surrounding golden tassels and densely strung with pearls of various colors, all showed that it took a lot of manpower. After sitting in the sedan, the buttocks couldn't move casually. It had to be safe and steady. Jingwan turned around and found something behind the sedan. Not only were there several kinds of snacks the size of fingertips, there were also small pieces of fruit. She couldn't drink water, but this was a good substitute. Jingwan used a skewer and unceremoniously ate it. Her miserably hungry stomach finally didn't feel so uncomfortable. For people who ate 3 meals on time every day and had a lot of portions, being hungry was definitely torture. Gong Mama also followed the sedan. Her hearing was good, so she heard the slight chewing sound, but she wasn't surprised. Speaking of which, it wasn't that they didn't prepare food for her, but there were too many people, so there wasn't a chance to give it to her. The servant girls were still anxious, distressed that their family's miss would continue to be hungry. Gong Mama was very calm. Sure enough, it was as expected. For Wang Ye to be able to do this, it was indeed very rare. She only hoped that he could keep it up. The husband and wife would grow old together, and the imperial Gui Fei Nyang would also be happy in the underworld. Setting out from the Luo family, they didn't go directly to Jinqin Wang Fu, but circled around the capital. Along the way, it was bustling with noise and excitement, and Jinqin Wang was rich and overbearing. Wherever the wedding procession passed, there would be people waving all kinds of nuts as well as a lot of copper coins. Because there were enough people along the way to maintain order, naturally there wouldn't be any crazy robberies or injuries. Instead, because of the benefits, it made the common people send their blessings from the bottom of their hearts. Even if they had originally placed bets on how long it would take for Jingwan to have an accident after their engagement, no one mentioned it again. As a result, this festive atmosphere was naturally pushed to the extreme. Li Hongyuan actually didn't expect this result. His original purpose was that he was overjoyed today and was in a good mood, so he distributed some wealth to increase the festive atmosphere. If possible, he wanted to accumulate some good fortune for his wife. But now the result made people very happy. Jinqin Wang, who usually had a paralyzed face to outsiders, couldn't help but hang a faint smile on his face, making the young and old wives and young ladies who saw him blush and their hearts beat faster, becoming infatuated. But this kind of atmosphere didn't continue. The wedding procession suddenly stopped. Jingwan was very surprised. Even if they went straight to Jinqin Wang Fu, they still hadn't arrived yet. Young lady, someone is blocking the sedan chair. Gong Momo leaned outside and said. Jingwan was astonished. The living king of hell was escorting the bride, yet dared to block the sedan chair. They were probably true warriors. However, what was the purpose of the person blocking the sedan chair? Generally speaking, there were only 2 reasons for blocking the sedan chair. First, there were people who didn't see the marriage pleasing to the eye and wanted to do something. Second, the married young lady was a good girl sought by hundreds of families. Naturally, they wanted to give a bit of color to the person who was going to marry her. It was a test for the groom and also to support the bride. Li Hongyuan tightened the reins in his hands. The horse under him was well behaved. Looking at the more than 100 people blocking the sedan chair, his eyes slightly narrowed. The onlookers were sweating for them. Why couldn't they think things through? If by any chance they angered this person, suffering some physical pain was a small matter. If they weren't careful, their future would be ruined. No matter what the reason was for Jinqin Wang, it was a kind of humiliation. In fact, they thought too much. Li Hongyuan wasn't angry. Looking at the person in the lead, he had already guessed the purpose of these people. Raising his hand, the sound of gongs and drums disappeared in an instant. The entire street, with so many people, seemed very quiet. What do you want? Li Hongyuan opened his mouth and said. He actually didn't flip out. Jinqin Wang had been engaged 8 times. It wasn't easy for him to wait for this marriage. He probably didn't want to see blood. Otherwise, how unlucky. There was a phrase called settling accounts after autumn. One of the men took a breath and stepped forward. This official Xie Renhui greets Wang Ye. This official and the other 10 people received Luo Sangunyang's kindness in the past and have never been able to repay it. Today is her big day. We only hope that she will marry a good man and live a prosperous life. Today we want to use our humble strength to test Wang Ye. Wang Ye is a noble descendant of the heavens and is incomparably honorable. However, if there is any offense after today, we are willing to accept punishment. Only except for the 10 of us, the rest were invited. We ask Wang Ye. Compete in drinking wine? Li Hongyuan waved his hand to interrupt him. He looked at the table at the side, the brush, ink, paper and inkstone on it, as well as the small bottles of wine. Yes, Wang Ye, please enlighten us. Li Hongyuan nodded. You are supporting Ben Wang's Wang Fei. Ben Wang naturally has to give her some face. He directly dismounted. Probably no one thought that Jin Qin Wang would agree. Knowing what the result would be, he still resolutely accepted. Just based on this point, Jin Qin Wang was a true man. However, if he didn't agree, it would probably be even more humiliating. However, these people clearly knew that Jin Qin Wang couldn't be offended, yet they still did this. They were indeed affectionate and righteous. Everyone was discussing animatedly. Although their voices weren't loud because there were so many people, it was a bit noisy. They were directly targeting the bridegroom. There was no reason for anyone to ask for help. Xie Renhui was the first to take out the couplet he had already written. The custom of blocking the sedan chair. If it involved knowledge, it would all be displayed. Li Hongyuan glanced at it. Should it be said that these people really cared about his face? Li Hongyuan picked up a small jar of wine. One hand was enough to hold it. The word, double happiness, was pasted on it. Uncorking the bottle, he raised his head and fiercely gulped down 2 mouthfuls. Then he casually threw it away. With a clatter, the wine jar broke into pieces. It can't be, you can't match it so easily? Obviously, anyone with a bit of knowledge shouldn't have a problem. Jin Qin Wang is really... Xie Renhui's face was also a bit ugly. Their goal was to support Luo Sangunyang, not to step on Jin Qin Wang. After all, as Luo Sangunyang's husband, if he was stepped on too unsightly, Luo Sangunyang's face would also lose. In order to do it more beautifully, they didn't spare any effort. At the crucial time, Jin Qin Wang dropped the chain? If they had known. The next moment they saw Li Hongyuan pick up a brush, dip it in ink, brush it a few times and then throw the brush away. In a flash, the gray on Xie Renhui's face dissipated. His eyes lit up and looked at Li Hongyuan with disbelief. What are you looking at Ben Wang for? Chapter 237. What are you looking at Ben Wang for? Li Hongyuan lightly glanced at him. Xie Renhui quivered. Should he say that he was truly worthy of being called the living king of hell? But that aura was not sinister and ruthless, making people fearful. It was clearly the Emperor of the 9 and 5. His accumulated power was deep, not angry but awe-inspiring. It made people feel that even looking at him was blasphemy, a great disrespect. Xie Renhui lowered his eyes and suppressed the surging emotions in his heart. His gaze once again fell on the second half of the couplet given by Jin Qin Wang. Not to mention that the second half of the couplet was neatly written and had a profound meaning, surpassing the ordinary first half of the couplet by countless times. Just based on the handwriting, there were already very few people who could match it. Xie Renhui suddenly felt a little worried. Since it had been hidden for so long, now that it was revealed, wouldn't it be, however, since Jin Qin Wang dared to do this, he must have his own considerations. Xie Renhui picked up the second half and showed it to the others. The voices that were originally discussing spiritedly, in that instant, returned to dead silence. Especially those who were full of contempt for Li Hongyuan, it was as if a fishbone was stuck in their throats. Their expressions were exceptionally splendid. This was the second half of the couplet given by Jin Qin Wang? This was Jin Qin Wang's handwriting? If this was called worthless, then what about them? It was fake, right? Perhaps they had already colluded beforehand. Another couplet. Li Hongyuan did the same thing. He drank a jar of wine and couplet after couplet. His posture was incomparably carefree and unrestrained, with an indescribable forthrightness. The people who were watching the show became even quieter. More than 100 people meant more than 100 couplets. If they could not match, they would be punished with drinking. Li Hongyuan drank the wine and the couplet was correct. Gradually, the prepared first half of the couplet was no longer followed but chosen from the back. So much so that after looking at each other, many people stepped out and rewrote the couplet. The first half of the couplet was too shallow. Compared to Jin Qin Wang's second half, it was really shameful. Since Jin Qin Wang had this kind of literary talent, then why not turn this fake test into a real test? Even if it was still considered fake, then, what about that handwriting? Was it something that could be practiced in 1 day or 2 days, 1 month or 2 months, 1 year or 2 years? Others might misunderstand, but would the people who participated in stopping the sedan chair not know whether it was fake or not? After today, at least these people would treat Li Hongyuan differently. There were more and more couplets. Li Hongyuan personally added a festive touch to his and Jingwan's wedding. The floor was littered with broken wine jars, and the fragrance of wine soared into the sky. It was the so-called peace and prosperity. Whether it was talent or wine, it showed that he cared about the bride. Just as Li Hongyuan himself said, he also wanted to win some face for his Wang Fei. When a person who wasn't favored at all showed his outstanding side just for his wife, the face he was showing was extraordinarily big, and the initial silence also turned into an uproar. Especially the people who sent her off later, they felt that they had more face. It must be known that because the elders couldn't send her off, the ones who sent her off were either Jingwan's brothers or sisters, or people of the same generation who had a good relationship with her. To be honest, at the very beginning, they all felt that marrying Jin Qinhuang was no different than jumping into a fire pit. But for those who were close to Jingwan, no one thought that Li Hongyuan was worthy of Jingwan. Even Luo Shangshu and old Madame Luo, who knew the truth from the beginning, changed their views a little after Jin Qinhuang's actions, but it was still far from enough. Jingwan sat in the sedan chair, and the food she ate had already been placed back in the distance. Although she couldn't see the situation outside, but many of the couplets had been read out by people. Especially towards the end, some people even wrote out the absolute in the past, and Li Hongyuan's answer also made people clap their hands in praise. Even more, Gong Mama told her one by one outside. From the very beginning of her contact with Li Hongyuan, she knew that this man's reputation as a womanizer aside in other aspects, he was absolutely not that terrible to look at. She knew that he was hiding his strength and also knew that he had ambitions. Moreover, he didn't hide it in front of her. She even believed that after marriage she would know more and more. Now that he exposed some of it, in terms of talent, the person sitting in that position didn't need to be outstanding. But now that he was a prince, if he operated properly, he could attract some people to work for him. Since he dared to expose it, he naturally had no fear. However, today's matter shouldn't be within the scope of the plan. Even if she believed in him, she still couldn't help but worry. This kind of emotion was hard to control. And now that he drank so much wine, even if he didn't collapse from drinking, it wasn't good for the body. Jingwan knocked on the bedside. Nanny Gong opened the curtains a little and asked, "Miss, is something the matter? It's inconvenient for Miss to speak now, how about writing it on Newbie's hand?" Jingwan nodded, the veil on her head swaying. Reaching out, she wrote on Gong Mama's hand, "Once upon a time I obtained a couplet and brought it to Wang Ye to be admired by everyone. Smoke locks the willow pond." Gong Mama's talent wasn't that great, but she could still see the subtlety of this couplet. Gong Mama walked to Jin Qinhuang's side, and at this time, Li Hongyuan had already finished writing the last couplet. "Wang Ye, even if Li Hongyuan didn't get drunk after 1,000 cups, but that small jar after small jar, there were hundreds of jars. Each jar probably only drank a little less than half, and now he was a bit dizzy. Fortunately, these people were also worried that Li Hongyuan would get drunk and didn't prepare too much. What's the matter?" As he spoke, he carelessly wiped the corners of his mouth and the excess wine on his body with a handkerchief. TSK, it seemed that he had to change into a set of wedding clothes before the wedding ceremony. Originally, because there was a toast at the banquet, he prepared 2 more sets of clothes. Granny Gong repeated Jingwan's words to her. "Smoke locks the willow pond?" Li Hongyuan repeated it in a whisper and then picked up the brush to write. Probably because he was a bit drunk, his writing became more wild. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth, the artistic conception is absolute, great kindness. I'll leave it to you. Pass on Ben Wang's words, whoever can match it absolutely, will be rewarded 10,000 taels. Li Hongyuan threw down the brush, turned around and leisurely returned. He mounted the horse, his posture still ramrod straight. The people blocking the sedan naturally hurriedly gave way. There were still people immersed in the first half of the couplet, carefully deliberating to match the second half. When they were pulled by the people beside them, they also hurriedly walked to the side. Li Hongyuan cupped his hands towards them from the horseback. Everyone might as well come to the Wangfu to drink a cup of wedding wine. Many thanks to Wang Ye. Many people hurriedly said excitedly. For the Wangfu's wedding banquet, unless they were closely related with their status, most people didn't have the qualifications to enter and sit. Speaking of which, even after staying for so long, Jingwan's sedan still hadn't been lowered. Fortunately, the people carrying the sedan were all strong and strong. They carried the sedan and stood in the same place, not moving at all. So when they started to walk again, they didn't lift the sedan. Jingwan only thought of this in hindsight. Thinking about it, these people must have practiced martial arts and were strong and healthy. After this incident, there naturally wouldn't be any more unnecessary incidents later on. However, Jin Qinhuang's 1 against 100 second half would certainly spread out in a very short period of time. And many people were delighted to see it. Knowing the value of those words, they secretly put them away. These were the first calligraphy treasures that Jin Qinhuang spread out. Approaching Jin Qinhuang's fu, they heard the joyous sound of drums. The Wang fu also sounded like gongs and drums and firecrackers wantonly. After stopping the sedan and opening the door, a 5 or 6-year-old girl dressed up came out of the sedan to welcome the bride. Opening the sedan door, she used her tender little hand to lightly pull Jingwan's sleeve 3 times. Only then did Jingwan come out of the sedan and step on the red carpet. Supported by the matron of honor, she stood on the right side of the Wangfu's main gate. It was reasonable to say that in the process of Jingwan getting out of the sedan, Li Hongyuan should have entered the door to hide his shame, and then let a small servant invite him out. But a certain person didn't follow the rules and directly stood on the left side of Jingwan. The master of ceremony vigorously gave Li Hongyuan a meaningful glance, but unfortunately, his eyes were almost twitching. Jin Qinhuang also didn't understand his meaning. The others also looked anxiously, but the result was that the living king of hell expressed impatience. The matron of honor felt her scalp go numb from Jin Qinhuang's gaze. Suddenly understanding, she hurriedly took the red silk tied with red flowers. Li Hongyuan took a step forward, but as he moved, he always paid attention to Jingwan's speed. Jingwan's line of sight was blocked. At this time, she could only slightly lower her eyes and slowly move forward. But fortunately, the matron of honor was by her side, reminding her in a timely manner. For example, going up the steps, and for example, in front of the entrance there was a scarlet red saddle with an apple. This thing, without understanding, should know that it symbolized peace and safety. Inside the main gate, both sides of the red carpet were naturally full of guests. Speaking of which, the matter of the sedan being stopped had already been passed back. Seeing Jin Qinhuang's wet clothes, it was certain that this matter was definitely true. Only the matter of Jin Qinhuang's great power was still to be discussed. However, most people expressed doubts, but there were some people who looked at Li Hongyuan with increasingly deep and serene eyes. For example, those brothers of his. They only had one thought, hiding it so deeply. In the end, what did they want to do? Some people paid attention to Li Hongyuan, and naturally there were also people who paid attention to Jingwan. That incomparably luxurious wedding dress, 3 feet behind her, dragged on the ground. As she walked slowly, the fragrant red petals on the red carpet quietly danced, stealthily scattering into her wide sleeves. The sleeves and dress gently rose and fell with the breeze, as if a boundless sea of flowers was surging, and also like a burning flame on the horizon, rolling down from the high altitude, as if it would burn down this bustling city. There were even people who wanted to lift your gorgeous veil to see the bride's peerless elegance. Of course, naturally there were also people who were jealous. For example, those Wang Fei who were about to become Jingwan's sisters-in-law. It must be known that when they were married, the clothes were not embroidered by themselves. The more important it was, the better the material and workmanship were. Among them, the most honorable one was Kong Wang Fei. However, Kong Wang Fei had already passed away, so the first share naturally fell to Rui Wang Fei. At that time, the imperial family gave her less than Kong Wang Fei, but in terms of quality she was even better. Just like the wedding dress, only hers was better. Including the future sisters-in-law, none of them could compare to her. Although she knew that this was the result of the competition between the imperial concubines and the imperial princes, she still had a sense of superiority in her heart. But at this moment, that sense of superiority was completely gone. This wedding dress, she had never thought about it. In fact, no matter how rare something was, as long as the imperial family wanted it, they could naturally take it out. The bright red moonlight silk, it was just that they didn't think of it. Jin Qinhuang thought of it. Rui Wang Fei suppressed the sourness in her heart. Some things, no matter how jealous she was, it was useless. Moreover, these honors were all given by men. When fourth sister-in-law found trouble with Luo Sangunyang at that time, why didn't she think of the root problem? Rui Wang Fei put her gaze on Li Hongyuan again. This man may have deceived everyone. Perhaps his good to Luo Sangunyang was only because of his love and care for her. There were no outsiders' messy guesses, like not putting his other brothers in his eyes and giving them face, that he finally had a wife, so naturally he had to treat her better, that he had a lot of good things even if it was to show off. Fortunately, there was still some time before the auspicious time. Jingwan temporarily rested under the cloth shed set up in the front porch of the main hall. Li Hongyuan quickly went to change his clothes. The auspicious time has arrived, the master of ceremonies announced loudly. Li Hongyuan led the way into the wedding hall, but because his Laozi was the emperor, it was impossible for him to appear. The position in the hall was empty. The new couple faced the door. Kneel. Turn around. Kneel. Kowtow, 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 kowtow. They stood facing each other. In Qiyuan, when they kowtowed to each other, it meant that the one who knelt first would be the master of the family in the future. Because of this, there was a scene where the bride kicked the groom's mat with her feet. Occasionally the groom would go on strike. In front of the royal family, probably no one would be stupid enough to kneel first, especially as the daughter-in-law of the royal family. Jingwan certainly would not do such a boring thing. Because, like the other daughters-in-law of the royal family, she stood for a while and knelt when she felt that it was enough. But she did not know that in fact, it was her who knelt first and Li Hongyuan who knelt first. Although there was not much difference between the two of them, the others clearly saw the short period of time he waited. His meaning could not be more obvious. This. Kowtow, 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 kowtow. Send them to the bridal chamber. https://11/1180/6653343. Chapter 238. The two children from before carried the dragon and phoenix candles and led the way. Li Hongyuan used the red silk ribbon to lead Jingwan to the bridal chamber. The wedding hall was in the main hall of the front courtyard, and the bridal chamber was in the main rear courtyard. In such a big wangfu the distance was not short. Especially when Jingwan had to step on the rice bags as she walked. There were 5 rice bags laid out in succession. Every time she walked past one, a maidservant would pass it to the front and lay it on the red carpet. Carrying on the family line 5 generations living under the same roof. The rice bags were laid out flat. Except for her line of sight being obstructed, Jingwan walked steadily step by step. Walking to the bridal chamber door, Jingwan stepped over the brazier at the door. Under the guidance of the matron of honor, Jingwan and Li Hongyuan walked to the bedside. However, they first went up a step, past the door, and then walked 2 more steps before reaching the edge of the bed. Very good, from now on they would start to walk on the bed. The man was on the left and the woman was on the right. Originally, Li Hongyuan should have pressed his right lapel against Jingwan's left lapel, but he seemed to have forgotten the rules. The two people's clothes were just next to each other, without any gap or overlap. The first time he might have forgotten, but what about the second or third time? Entering the door, he didn't hide his shame, he didn't kneel first when bowing to the heaven and earth, he didn't press down on the bride's head when sitting in the tent. The intention of holding the wife high was obvious. Then why did Jin Qinhuang do this? But at this time, there probably wouldn't be anyone stupid enough to remind him. Next it was time to spread the tent. The house was full of womenfolk, Sun Yijia and the others who came to send off Jingwan, and the noble ladies of the imperial family. No matter what their thoughts were, the house was full. At this time, everyone worked together, laughing as they continuously scattered red dates, peanuts, longans, lotus seeds and other things. As they scattered, they also said auspicious words. Everywhere in the house, on the bed, and naturally on Jingwan's body. It must be said that these things, if they used a bit of strength, it would be quite painful when they hit the body. However, with the living king of hell watching from the side, even if his expression was calm, he was completely a quiet and beautiful man. But every time someone threw something at Jingwan, his line of sight would always look at the person who did it. They always felt that with that one glance, his eyes would become deep and serene, as if he wanted to remember you and then. So, they would always stiffen and subconsciously reduce their strength or simply turn around and scatter it to other places. In the end, in Jingwan's arms there were only a few things which made some people couldn't help but think of the time when they got married, they almost buried themselves. Not only that, it was also unbearably painful. After all, there were some people who maliciously wanted to tease others. This was the difference. Or they could use, the bride didn't receive as many blessings as they did, to balance their minds. As for their real thoughts, probably only they themselves knew. After setting up the curtain, the matron of honor brought the wedding scale. Li Hongyuan stood up, took the scale and gently lifted the veil on Jingwan's head. Jingwan slightly raised her head, and Li Hongyuan's eyes became extraordinarily gentle and affectionate. It was obviously not the first time that she had seen his eyes like this, and compared with the other newlyweds, they could not be more familiar with each other, but inexplicably, she had the illusion that it had been 10,000 years. Then Jingwan inexplicably blushed and quickly lowered her head. Li Hongyuan gently raised the corners of his mouth. Today Wanwan was extraordinarily beautiful. She rarely wore red, but she did not know that when she wore it she was so delicate and beautiful, which made his heart itch. He even wanted to directly drive everyone out and bring forward their wedding night. Perhaps in the future he could buy more red clothes for her. The groom is dumbfounded by the bride, right? But the bride is really beautiful. Someone teased, and the others echoed and laughed. Jingwan now only needed to bow her head and pretend to be shy and not speak. Li Hongyuan put down the wedding scale and sat back. At this time the servant brought the dumplings. The matron of honor took it to Jingwan, picked it up and fed it to Jingwan. The dumplings were very small and could be eaten in one bite. When Jingwan chewed subconsciously, she remembered that this thing seemed to be half-cooked and should be swallowed directly. But after chewing, Jingwan found that it was fully cooked. She glanced at Li Hongyuan from the corner of her eyes. He was also looking at Jingwan quietly. "Do you want to give birth?" The matron of honor asked with a smile. "Yes," Jingwan said against her will. The matron of honor fed her 2 more before she gave up. The maidservant brought 2 more glasses of wine. In fact, rich people basically no longer used gourds to drink the nuptial wine. According to the different social classes and the different degrees of wealth, the cups used were naturally different. The quilt was connected with a red rope. Jingwan and Li Hongyuan each took a cup, faced each other sideways, slightly raised the cup, drank half of the cup, and then exchanged the wine cups and drank up the wine in the cup. The matron of honor's auspicious words came out freely, and the others also laughed, but it had no effect on the 2 newlyweds. Jingwan was really calm. As for Li Hongyuan, when he wanted to pretend, no one could see his true thoughts. After drinking the nuptial wine, it was time to tie the hair. The matron of honor cut a strand of Li Hongyuan's hair with scissors and then cut it for Jingwan. Don't think that the bride's hair couldn't be cut because her hair was tied up tightly and the phoenix coronet couldn't be removed. In fact, when the bride combed her hair, she had already reserved a small tuft. This small tuft could be easily removed and it wouldn't affect her hair at all. The maidservant took the hair of the 2 people, mixed it with the red silk thread, neatly woven it into a concentric knot, and hung it on the bed. From now on, their bodies and souls would be combined together forever, never to be separated. The people in the room wanted to continue to make trouble for the bride, but the groom sat there and didn't leave. He just looked at them quietly. The meaning of driving them away was obvious. Want to torture his wife? Haha, not to mention the door, there was no crack in the door. In this way these people went out obediently without the help of the bride's family. Therefore, the reputation of the living king of hell was very useful in many cases. If it wasn't for him, in the face of these imperial ladies, the bride's family really couldn't drive them away. If they encountered some excessive ones, the bride may be wronged. Without comparison, it was difficult to distinguish good from bad. Jingwan's sisters-in-law, which one of them hadn't been disturbed? Although it wasn't excessive, none of them were protected by their new husbands. In their view, this was a very normal thing. But now they inexplicably felt very wronged. However, when they saw the 4 maidservants, their hearts were balanced. The people who didn't want to work had all left. Li Hongyuan reached out to hold Jingwan and kissed her. Jingwan hurriedly reached out to stop him, but how could she stop him? Li Hongyuan kissed her fiercely for a while before letting go. Jingwan's lips were basically eaten up by him, but he still licked his lips and stared at Jingwan. His eyes really wanted to swallow her alive. Jingwan swallowed her saliva and moved back. Speaking of which, this man was also very charming. He actually used the beauty trap on her. It was too unkind. Now that they were officially husband and wife, being teased like this, Jingwan was afraid that she couldn't control herself and directly pounced on him. "Your Highness should go out." "Ha." Li Hongyuan chuckled. "Wanwan, don't worry. I've waited for so long. It's not like I can't wait until nighttime." According to his own nature, he would directly go to the bridal chamber now. He was too lazy to care about the people outside. But in this way, his little sweetheart would be gossiped about again. 99 steps had been taken, so this last step didn't make a difference. Jingwan's face was paralyzed. Li Hongyuan knew that she wasn't angry but had nothing to say. He was even more amused. He reached out to touch the tip of her nose. "I'll go out first. You don't need to be restrained in the room. I'll have the servants prepare a table of noodles for you. Don't starve yourself. If you don't like to eat or if there's anything you want to eat, just tell them." Jingwan nodded. He was really becoming more and more long-winded. This wasn't the right style, okay? Speaking of which, this should be a completely unfamiliar place. But the fact was, the furnishings here were quite similar to her boudoir in the Luo family. It was just that the place was much bigger. In addition, the servants who were supposed to serve her were all here, so she really didn't feel restrained. Li Hongyuan leaned over and kissed her again before preparing to leave. Nurse Gong very calmly handed him a handkerchief to let him wipe the remaining lipstick on his lips. The banquet was a flowing banquet that would last from now until the evening. Speaking of which, whether it was the Minister of Personnel Affairs Fu or Jin Qinhuang Fu, they couldn't be ignored. Thus, many people hung gifts from both sides today. If they were from the same family, they had to carefully weigh which house they wanted to visit. This was a burden, but also an honor. After all, to be able to visit both sides at the same time, they also needed to have status. The banquet for the bridal chamber was quickly sent over. Slowly the table was filled, but the portion of each dish was very small. Most of them were Jingwan's favorite dishes and the rest. There are chefs from all over the world in the Wang Fu. Wang Ye's intention is to let Wang Fei have a taste first and see what you like to eat. When the chefs know that Wang Fei has married into the family, they're rubbing their hands and preparing to show off their skills. A servant girl beside Li Hongyuan laughed softly. Jingwan naturally knew this servant girl. Although she hadn't seen her many times, the four of them were dressed as young ladies. I haven't been conferred the title yet, just call me foreign now. Wang Fei doesn't need to worry too much. These words won't spread out. Newbie knows the severity of the matter. However, it should be around the same time. They had been warned earlier. Jingwan also didn't haggle over this issue. What are you called? Replying to Wang Fei, Newbie Qing Shi. Newbie and the four of us have poems and songs. Qing comes from the green mountains and clear waters. Qing, was it a coincidence? It should be a coincidence, ba. After all, the several head servant girls by her side were given names a few years ago. At that time they had nothing to do with a certain person. Qing Shi served Jingwan. Her dowry servant girls didn't have any intention to step forward and interfere. Instead, it was Jingwan's wet nurse. Qing Shi's eyes swept over them thoroughly from head to toe. In her eyes, these were bewitching foxes that would destroy the relationship between a young lady and her son-in-law. Her gaze wasn't hidden at all. This kind of thing couldn't be more normal. Qing Shi didn't even frown. She only thought that after a period of time, when the matters in her hands were handed over to Wang Fei's dowry servant girls, she would probably be able to ask Wang Fei to appoint a marriage. Speaking of which, when they were in the summer palace, Jingwan discovered that Qing Shi was very good at serving her. Qing Shi knew her little habits. Whatever she wanted to eat, Qing Shi didn't need to say much and would be able to prepare it. As for Jingwan, who was focused on eating, only after eating did she realize that the one serving her wasn't her own servant girl. Unexpectedly, she didn't feel the slightest bit out of place. This was interesting. Perhaps the other three servants were similar. Jingwan naturally couldn't eat for as long as she did outside. After eating, she withdrew. Afterwards, Qing Xi and Qing Gu came in with water to wash her face and hands. Qing Zhu helped her put on makeup again. Today's matter wasn't over yet, so the makeup couldn't be removed. Does Wang Fei want to read a book? Qing Shi suggested. Just sitting there would definitely be boring. Jingwan nodded. Qing Shi brought out a small snail book, miscellaneous notes, travel notes and picture books. They were all good things to pass the time. The preparation was complete. Jingwan temporarily took off the wedding dress outside. Leaning on the couch, she seriously flipped through the books. Occasionally she would be fed a piece of cut fruit. To be honest, it wasn't any different from before she got married. It was really very comfortable. And Qing Zhu and the others were directly pulled out by several other people enthusiastically. They didn't need to ask anything and just told them about the situation of Jin Qinhuang Fu like pouring beans. They even divided the work and worked together. Each person worked together and didn't repeat the same thing. It was a very thin book. Jingwan read half of it. Mu Gonggong came in a hurry, but he didn't come in at this time. Qing Xi lifted the curtain and came in. Wang Fei, the imperial edict for conferring titles has arrived. Wang Yi asked you to go to the front courtyard to receive the edict. Jingwan was slightly startled. The imperial edict for conferring titles came down so quickly? Wasn't it supposed to wait until after she returned home? But thinking about a certain person's style, she more or less understood what was going on. He really knew how to draw hatred to her. But she couldn't deny that she was happy because she was cared about and valued. That bit of hatred and whatnot didn't matter. The red wedding dress was put on again. Going to the front courtyard, Li Hongyuan reached out and pulled her to his side. His movements were natural and intimate. With the veil lifted, Jingwan's appearance was completely revealed. Standing next to Jin Wangfu, it was an unspeakable match, just like a jade couple. This woman who was about to become Jin Wangfu's consort was really outstanding. With Li Hongyuan and Jingwan taking the lead, everyone knelt down in succession. Although there was no conferring ceremony, the treasured book, imperial seal and Qin Wangfei attire were all present. Not only that, Jingwan was also given a considerable reward. Therefore now only Jingwan was the main character. Including Li Hongyuan, everyone was reduced to supporting roles. Naturally, some people were happy, some people, Jingwan's sisters-in-law before Jingwan, even if there was a gap, it wasn't very big. Whether it was superiority or dissatisfaction, it wasn't very strong. But now that Jingwan took the lead in everything and surpassed them by too much, their hearts naturally. However, Jin Wangfu is the leader among the princes, his Wangfei is the first among the prince's consorts. What's so strange about that? Thus, after being pricked by a needle, her entire person was crying. It was her man who didn't put in the effort. This was a happy event on top of a happy event. When the guests poured wine for Li Hongyuan, they became more and more impolite. Especially those brothers of his, they were even more vile, wishing that they could make him crawl down and not enter the bridal chamber. However, Li Hongyuan had perfectly demonstrated to them what it meant to drink like a drunken stupor. He had directly used his actions to tell them, bring it on. Not to mention his group of brothers, even the courtiers, he didn't refuse anyone. The final result was that Li Hongyuan overturned a group of people by himself. Those who wanted to get him drunk, the ones lying down were definitely themselves. Only those who gave him a toast were still standing. Not to mention that all the guests were shocked by his volume, even Jingwan almost jumped up after hearing it. But she was the one who did it. Alcohol poisoning, that wasn't a joke. If it wasn't done well, it could cause someone to die. The wine he used for his wedding would definitely be the best wine. Jingwan hurriedly asked someone to prepare a hangover soup for him. Thinking about it, it still wasn't possible. She reckoned that she had to directly find a doctor. Not long after Jingwan gave the order, Li Hongyuan had already returned. Jingwan wanted to directly go out, but there were other people who came in with her. Li Hongyuan came in alone. He didn't walk out of a snake-like path, but his feet were obviously a little wobbly and his eyes weren't focused. He stood for a while and then walked towards the bed. When he lifted his foot, he didn't stabilize his body and directly threw himself towards Jingwan. Jingwan hurriedly supported him. Wang, quickly bring the hangover soup and the food doctor. Wan, I'm fine. Li Hongyuan hugged Jingwan and rubbed against her. The food doctor didn't come, but he brought in a hangover medicine. Li Hongyuan acted shamelessly and refused to take it. Then he hugged Jingwan and didn't let go. Jingwan could only patiently coax him and let him take the medicine. The two women who came in with good fortune and virtue were endlessly embarrassed. However, when this person was drunk, he was really different from normal. As the saying goes, one speaks the truth after drinking. Some behavior after drinking should be a good reflection of a person's heart. Jin Qinhuang should really like his Wangfei. Along the way, he didn't want others to get close to him. He hugged his Wangfei but didn't let go. Jingwan also looked at the two people and was somewhat embarrassed. She helped him to sit properly and kindly let him complete the last ceremony, the 3 drinks and drink ceremony. Li Hongyuan seemed to be unable to sit still. He leaned on Jingwan and half closed his eyes, looking at the irrelevant people. The two women's scalps tingled from being stared at and quickly called for people to bring wine. The first cup of wine to congratulate the groom. If there's any gossip to talk about, I'm afraid the other people will want to listen in. The second cup of wine to congratulate the groom. The matters in the room should be discussed secretly in case other people want to talk. The third cup of wine to congratulate the groom. I wish the husband and wife to grow old together and give birth to a son as soon as possible. Every time, Jingwan and Li Hongyuan only needed to take a sip and exchange wine cups. After that, the two women hurriedly left. Even if they were elders, they also didn't want to face this living king of hell. Wan, the people who are in the way have finally left. Li Hongyuan pushed Jingwan down. He could officially enjoy the delicious meal. Jingwan was also helpless. She pushed Li Hongyuan, who was nibbling on her body. Wang, let's take a bath first, okay? And this bed also needs to be tidied up. There are so many things, if you don't get down you'll feel uncomfortable. Li Hongyuan paused and got up. He picked up Jingwan and walked towards the clean room. This time the serving maidservants were all dumbfounded. Wang and Wang Fei went in together. How could they serve them? The headquarters could send Wang Ye's personal maidservants to serve them. But they found that none of the 4 people, Ci, Gu and Fu, had come in. Wang Ye's servant girls were indeed a bit strange. Not only did they tell them everything, but when Wang Yi returned, they hid far away. Was this to prevent them from finding out the real secret of the Wang Fu and, trying to cover it up would only make it more conspicuous? Or was it to numb them and then plan a big conspiracy? Alright, what are you waiting for? Hurry and clean up the bed. Mama Gong took out the clothes the two needed to wear from the cabinet and walked into the clean room. She wasn't surprised to see the two people who were already in the heat of the moment. Jingwan's red wedding dress was half taken off and hung on her arm. Her white undergarments were also pulled open, revealing the red bodice inside. The golden phoenix belt had been mercilessly thrown to the ground. Mama Gong calmly picked it up. Wang Ye, the aunties from the palace have already brought the silk cloth. Tomorrow she will bring it back to the palace. Being interrupted in the heat of the moment was definitely not something to be happy about. Li Hongyuan looked darkly at Mama Gong. Jingwan was also embarrassed and quickly retreated. Wanwan, wash. I'll change to another place to wash. At this time it was really easy to get angry. He had endured it for so long. If he had to fake the silk cloth on the wedding night, it really would be a big loss. Li Hongyuan left. Mama Gong helped Jingwan bathe. She also calmly gave Jingwan a massage to loosen her muscles. When Jingwan came out, there was only a certain someone in the room who was absent-mindedly reading a book. She was wearing underwear with a loose robe draped over her shoulders. She was a beauty under the light. The more one looked at her, the more attractive she was. Li Hongyuan threw the book in his hand, picked up Jingwan, and walked to the wedding bed. He put Jingwan on the bed and pulled down the bed curtain. Jingwan cried out in surprise, followed by muffled sounds. Wang Ye, you're not drunk? A little. I'm awake now. If I knew they would force me to drink, I would have taken the hangover medicine in advance. Do they think they can stop this prince from entering the nuptial chamber? I've waited for this night for so long. How can I miss it? Nanny Gong opened the side door of the cleansing room and ordered people to carry the water out. She cleaned up the cleansing room and locked the side door tightly. She went into the bridal chamber and heard the sounds of moaning and gasping. She went to put down the curtain outside the step bed and then went to the outer room. It wasn't just the dragon and phoenix candles beside the bed. All the other candles in the room were lit. Li Hongyuan's body was drenched in sweat, but he was extremely gentle. Wanwan, my good darling, bear with it. Jingwan lay on her back with her head tilted back. Her neck was stretched to its limit. She had to pass this hurdle. She had to suffer. But when it really happened, Jingwan still screamed. Li Hongyuan didn't dare to continue. He kept comforting her, but he endured it with great difficulty. Big beads of sweat rolled down Jingwan's body one after another. Jingwan's nails left scratches on his back. Jingwan tried hard to relax her body. Ayuan, it's enough. In fact, her body was sending out signals that it wasn't enough. But it was uncomfortable to be in such a state. Li Hongyuan hardened his heart. With so much noise in the room, it was impossible for the people outside not to hear. Especially Mama Gong, who heard everything clearly. She frowned slightly. She didn't know how much Princess Consort was going to suffer tonight. On the other hand, the aunt next to her didn't hear clearly, but she knew that it was getting better. She laughed happily. Now the imperial consort can finally rest assured. All these years, she has been looking forward to having someone close to her to take care of His Highness. As for the Luo family's third young miss, I should call her Princess Consort now. She was conferred the title of Princess Consort on the day of her marriage. Even in the history of Qi Yuan, it's the first time a princess consort was conferred the title of princess consort. Mama Gong nodded indifferently and didn't say anything. The wet nurse, on the other hand, felt that it wasn't good to be left out. That was the maid of the young lady's mother-in-law. She didn't want to make things difficult for the young lady. Thinking of this, she cheered up and chatted with the maid warmly. After half an hour, Li Hongyuan asked for water for the first time. Li Hongyuan sat in the bathtub with Jingwan in his arms. She didn't know when a jade bottle appeared in his hand. He poured out a pill and dissolved it in the water. Wanwan, this is a contraceptive. I've asked many people to try it. It won't harm the body. You're still young and your bones haven't grown. We'll have a child in 2 years. Besides, I can't and I don't want to have a child now. I won't tolerate it if your brother and sister-in-law were to have a child after marriage. You can only be mine. No one can distract you. Don't blame me. Jingwan looked at him with sparkling eyes. Suddenly she reached out and hooked his neck. She leaned forward and kissed him. Oh my, this man was so cute at this moment. Moreover, he was jealous of a little child who was nowhere to be found. It seemed a little cute. This hungry wolf who took the initiative to come to him was far from satisfied. Of course he wouldn't be polite. Moreover, he didn't care about anything else. He directly messed around in the bathtub and changed the water before coming out. The bed had been cleaned. Nurse Gong put away the handkerchief and put it away. It had been more than an hour since they started. It was probably time to rest when they returned to the bed. However, it didn't take long for the aunt who came out from the palace to realize her naivety. She laughed dryly. Your Highness's stamina is really good. Asking for water for the third time was a must. Finally it stopped. Jingwan was really too tired. When Li Hongyuan carried her back to the bed, she had already fallen asleep. With Jingwan in his arms, Li Hongyuan could always fall asleep very quickly. However, this time it wasn't as peaceful as before. He dreamed. He dreamed of one of the deepest memories of his previous life. He had already recovered from his injuries. He hid his only gentleness in the deepest part of his heart. He abandoned all his kindness and even his humanity. He swore to snatch the position that he had never thought of before. In order to achieve his goal, he would do anything. His hands were stained with blood. His heart, liver, and lungs were stained black. He planned step by step and then returned to the capital. He was no longer the Li Hongyuan who could be easily schemed against. Even if he faced not only the suppression of his brothers, but also his father who wanted to kill him directly. Even if he was surrounded by danger, besieged on all sides and suffered heavy losses, he still stubbornly endured. Fu Yunting fought hard at the border for more than a year. In the end he couldn't hold on any longer. In front of him was a fierce army, beside him were the old and the weak. He had no provisions to support him. After a great defeat, he was accused of treason and was escorted back to the capital. He was thrown into prison. At this time, the former third daughter of the Luo family, who was now Fu Yunting's wife of Wu Wanho, completely changed him. The woman who moved his heart came to him and asked him to save Wu Wanho's nephews and nieces. He knew that she was at the end of her rope. In the entire Wu Wanho, she was the only one who hadn't been imprisoned. She didn't have to come back. If she wanted, she could have concealed her identity and waited for him to ascend the throne, but she still came back. She knew that once she was discovered, she would immediately be detained. She knew that it was impossible to save Fu Yunting. She didn't even mention it. She only wanted to protect the bloodline of the Fu family. Li Hongyuan was furious. He was angry that she gave up everything for that man. Now she was even willing to give up her life. He was even more jealous that Fu Yunting was able to obtain such a woman. He even wanted to rush into the prison and chop him up. Do you think that by saving this prince once, you can exchange 2 lives for it? Fu Yunting originally had 2 nephews and 1 niece. When he was detained, one of them fell ill. Because he didn't receive any treatment, he died in the prison within 2 days. Jingwan didn't resent him. This guilty woman has nothing now. What will it take for your highness to be willing to save people? As long as this guilty woman can do it, I'll do it even if it's a mountain of swords or a sea of flames. Li Hongyuan sneered. That's not necessary. You can exchange yourself for it. He saw that her weather-beaten eyes had become unusually firm. Her eyes, which didn't easily reveal any emotions, revealed shock and disbelief. Then they gradually calmed down. Okay. She didn't hesitate at all. She didn't ask him why. It was this kind of her that made him even angrier. But he couldn't push her away. At night, she took a bath and changed her clothes. Then she lay on his bed. His heart was filled with pain and hatred. Every time he wanted to tear her apart, he couldn't help but use less strength. However, his eyes suddenly widened. You've been married for almost 2 years. You still haven't consummated your marriage? https://11/118076653348. HTML. After making a report, please wait patiently and refresh the page. Chapter 239. Jingwan's face was flushed and her eyes were closed. Hearing this, her eyelashes trembled slightly and her eyes were blurred. Thinking about it, she was not a blockhead. No matter what she thought in her heart, it was normal for her body to have a reaction. Since she had already agreed, she naturally wouldn't be reluctant to do it. Who was she being pretentious for? Isn't this better for a man? Jingwan panted slightly. When she said this, she didn't have any other emotions, just stating a fact. This sentence inexplicably angered Li Hongyuan. He pinched Jingwan's chin. He really minded, but what he really minded was her relationship with Fu Yunting, not whether Jingwan was a virgin or not. He didn't deny that he was happy in his heart. This meant that she would completely belong to him, but he was even angrier and more distressed. As a legitimate husband and wife, they had been together for a long time. To a woman, being a virgin was not something to be happy about, but a great shame. Moreover, he didn't think that the problem was Jingwan. He knew Jingwan's character. She would never be fickle. She would never marry someone and not let her husband touch her. Moreover, if she really didn't want to, why would she give up everything for Fu Yunting and Wu Anho? Did it mean that she loved that man so much that even if they weren't husband and wife, she was still willing? Li Hongyuan's eyes were red with jealousy, and he didn't care about anything else. It was Jingwan's first pleasure. Naturally, she couldn't stand his torment. Fortunately, he recovered some of his reason. Seeing her so miserable, he was distressed. He hurriedly took her to bathe and applied medicine for her. Even if his body and mind were not completely relieved, he didn't dare to do it a second time. Li Hongyuan held Jingwan and wanted to rub her into his bones and blood. He treated you like that, but you still stubbornly love him and don't abandon him? What should I say about you? He felt pity for her and expected better from her. Jingwan was uncomfortable, but it was futile to struggle now, so she quietly let him hold her. Her thoughts were scattered and her reaction was slow. After a moment, she reacted to what Jin Qin was referring to. She didn't notice because of his black as ink face. It's not what Wang Ye thinks. Then what is it? What reason does a man have to not touch his wife? If it's not that his heart is completely filled with another woman, then he can't do it. No matter what, it is unforgivable. Whether he could do it or not, Jingwan really didn't know. However, it was true that he didn't have another woman. Jingwan also wouldn't maliciously speculate. I entered the door during his mourning period. It hadn't even been a month when his love was stolen and he led the army to battle. Jingwan said without any ripples. Ben Wang knows that the one who died was his uncle, not his father. Mourning for a year is the limit. You went all out to ask for provisions from the court and personally escorted the provisions to the border. Do you think that Ben Wang doesn't know how much respect the soldiers at the border have for you? You have a residence in the border city, you can enter and leave his main tent freely. No matter how busy he is with the war, he can't even spare a night? He wanted me to leave Wu Anho. Fu wanted me to leave him. In a man's eyes, as long as there's no physical involvement, there won't be such a deep bond for a woman. You make it sound better than singing, but you're just a hypocrite. If he really cared about you, why didn't he just write a letter of divorce? Even if you've already been expelled from the Luo family, that's because you don't want to implicate the Luo family and sully your own reputation. If you leave Wu Anho Fu, will the Luo family accept you back? In the end, he's still selfish and wants to tie you down. Without you, would he be able to last until now? Without you, the others in Wu Anho Fu wouldn't even need to go to prison. They would all be dead. It's not like that. Jingwan raised her head and calmly refuted. Then what is it? Li Hongyuan looked at her, silently asking what was it like. Tell him. He wanted to know. Jingwan lowered her head. Obviously, she didn't want to be entangled in this issue. Li Hongyuan's heart was irritable, but in reality he was in no position to question Jingwan. Moreover, after spending some time with her, he understood her personality. Once she decided on something, she would not change her mind easily. After a while, Jingwan's voice sounded again. The Fu family has been loyal to the Li royal family since the first Duke of Wun. The Li royal family wanted to completely exterminate the Fu family's bloodline. As for the other dukes and marquises, they just let them fall. The Fu family has been guarding the Qi Yuan for generations. Many of the Fu family's men have died on the battlefield. They can't even give up their military power because without power, the family will be exterminated even faster. This time, the emperor was willing to sacrifice 300,000 soldiers in the northwest in order to eliminate the Fu family. What? Don't tell me that it's because the Fu family is superior to the emperor. That's ridiculous. Why? Li Hongyuan was also puzzled by this question. After that, he secretly detained her in the Wang mansion. Jingwan did not cause any trouble for him. Instead, she gave him many suggestions and they were all very useful. She just refused to let him get close to her. However, the situation was too chaotic after all, and he did not have enough power. Jingwan's existence was known by others. Although no one knew his identity yet, some people felt that they had caught onto his weakness and deliberately used it to make up stories. When his father was fighting for the throne, he wanted nothing more than to get rid of him as soon as possible. He told him clearly that he would not give the throne to anyone but him. It was impossible for others to break into the Wang mansion, but it was different for the imperial guards who had the imperial edict. However, they didn't find anything. Jingwan was quick-witted and had already left. Li Hongyuan was too closely watched by all parties. There was no way he could find Jingwan. When he found out that Fu Yunting had left behind the last elite soldiers to protect her, he could only suppress his desire. But he became more and more ruthless. He only hoped that he could get power soon, and then, when they met again, it would be farewell. Li Hongyuan suddenly woke up. Under the candlelight, his eyes were as dark as ink. The situation in the dream was so clear. It didn't seem like a few decades had passed, but more like it was yesterday. Li Hongyuan was not sure if it was because he had completely united with Wan that it triggered such a clear memory. Because he was hugging Jingwan to sleep, this movement naturally affected Jingwan. However, probably because she was too tired, she did not wake up. She moved a little and leaned into Li Hongyuan's arms. She murmured as if she was in a dream. Yuan, Li Hongyuan's expression softened. He hugged Jingwan tightly in his arms. She was still in his arms. They were already husband and wife in name. He would not make the same mistake again. In this life, regardless of life or death, he would always tie Wan to his side. Jingwan was not wrapped around by him like a python. As the saying goes, the first time is unfamiliar, the second time is familiar. At this time, she unconsciously patted Li Hongyuan's hand to let him relax a little. Then she fell into a deep sleep again. Li Hongyuan stroked Jingwan's hair. Although Jingwan's original fate had changed, her death in the previous life could not let him go. He could not live through the days of her death. If he did not completely settle down, his heart would never be completely at peace. This had nothing to do with whether or not he had the confidence to protect her. However, now that he thought about it, in the previous life, Wan had never left Wu Wanho's residence. There must be other secrets. In the previous life he did not know, but in this life he was very clear. According to Wan's deep relationship with Madame Luo, Wan's matter would definitely bring her a great blow. If she was not careless, she could die. If it was not because she had no choice, why would Jingwan ignore her grandmother who had raised her for more than 10 years for Wu Wanho's residence? There was also the marriage between Jingwan and Fu Yunting. Even if Jingwan was schemed against, it was not impossible to ruin it. After all, it was not an arranged marriage. It was not easy for Jingwan to marry in the capital. At most, she would be sent back to Qian Manor. However, not only did she marry during Fu Yunting's mourning period, but she also fell head first into it without any hesitation. Wan had always been a rational person. She and Fu Yunting were not husband and wife, and the time they spent together was also very short. He did not believe that it was because of love. The more he thought about it, the more suspicious he felt. As for the former, even if Li Hongyuan became the emperor in the previous life, it was probably because of the destruction of the Fu family. In reality, there were still 2 children living in secret. There were no clues. In this life he was bound to find out the reason. However, he was not in a hurry now. Wu Wanho's residence was under his protection. It would not be easy to destroy it. Therefore, even if there were some things that only the emperor could know, he would find out sooner or later. The latter might be related to the former, or it might not be. If it was related, he would naturally know the answer. If it was not, then this matter would forever remain a mystery. It was not without reason that Li Hongyuan kept Fu Yunting alive. After all, Wan also wanted to know the reason. Of the 300,000 soldiers, more than 200,000 had died in the hands of the enemy. The remaining soldiers were killed under the orders of some people in order to cover up their crimes. Wan did not say anything, but she was very angry and also very distressed. Fu Yunting was born into a family of generals, and he was indeed worthy of his birth. He was an outstanding general. As such, if Li Hongyuan did not ruthlessly exploit him, he would feel that he was letting himself down. Li Hongyuan was so shameless. In the previous life he slept with Fu Yunting's wife. In this life, to a certain extent, he stole Fu Yunting's wife. Not only that, he also treated Fu Yunting as a thorn in his side. To be honest, Fu Yunting did not do anything wrong to Li Hongyuan. He was punished for no reason. In the end, he was deeply grateful to Li Hongyuan because Li Hongyuan protected Wu Wanho's residence, found him a wife, and secretly gave him a lot of money. No matter how he was treated, he did not resent Li Hongyuan. Therefore, Fu Yunting was really suffering. Listening to Jingwan's gentle breathing, his heart gradually calmed down. He hugged her soft body and fell asleep again. This time he did not have any dreams. The next morning, Jingwan did not wake up on time for morning exercise. She did not even move at all. It was obvious that she was exhausted last night. Since she did not have time for morning exercise, she naturally let him sleep a little longer. However, this sleep was not as simple as just a little longer. Seeing that it was almost time, they still had to enter the palace today. As the bride, Jingwan had to kowtow to His Majesty and the concubines. After that, she had to meet the relatives of the imperial family. Of course, it was only limited to those who had to kowtow to her. Mama Gong knocked on the door outside, but there was no response. Noble consort Su's people were still waiting for her to return to the palace with the silk handkerchief. Mama Gong hesitated for a moment, then quietly went in. Her aunt also followed her in. She approached the bed and said, Your Highness, it's time to get up. Noisy. Li Hongyuan's cold voice sounded. Mama Gong wanted to say something else, but her aunt hurriedly pulled her aside and said, It's okay. You can enter the palace later. They knew Li Hongyuan's temper very well. It was just that they could not enter the palace earlier to pay their respects. As long as this living ancestor was in a good mood, it would not be a problem to enter the palace later, let alone later. Mama Gong hesitated. As the bride, Your Highness. When a woman gets married, she naturally regards her husband as her god. Sister, do you know where Your Highness's silk handkerchief is? Mama Gong nodded. I'll go get it for you now. Of course, that's great. I'll return to the palace to report to noble consort first. When Your Highness and Your Highness get up, you can tidy up and enter the palace. Mama Gong sent her off and turned around. She had no intention of disturbing the two people on the bed. She was just putting on an act just now. She had to remove the princess from the picture as soon as possible. No matter what the reason was, she could not let others find fault with the princess. What she wanted was to regard her husband as her god. In the future, she could directly push all the blame to the prince. If she pushed the blame to others, she would be the scapegoat. If she pushed the blame to him, it would be like a feather brushing past, leaving no trace. Although Jingwan did not wake up on time because she was overworked last night, she only slept for an extra hour. When she woke up, Li Hongyuan was already awake. He was lying on his side with his head propped up. The bright red brocade quilt embroidered with 100 flowers slid down to his waist. The beautiful muscles on his body were perfectly displayed, full of strength and beauty. He quietly looked at her, his hand twirling her hair. Jingwan woke up to this seductive scene. In addition, his gaze was so gentle that it could make people drown. Jingwan directly reached out to hook his neck and raised her head to kiss him. Li Hongyuan's eyes darkened. His wife took the initiative to deliver herself to him. How could he not eat her? Jingwan had originally been lustful, and only wanted to have a morning kiss. She didn't want to be a sheep in the wolf's mouth. The two were not wearing clothes. Seeing a certain person's body become more and more excited, Jingwan quickly showed weakness. Ah Yuan, it still hurts. Li Hongyuan gave a low laugh. Don't worry. Just do what you did before. Jingwan had a sad face, but this wolf was trembling too much. He was not satisfied and was prepared to grind with her on the bed. Afterwards, Jingwan had no choice but to serve him patiently. In the end, she ended up being served, as well. This was good. Even if there was no morning exercise, she still had to take a bath. After getting out of the bath, Li Hongyuan did not let anyone serve him. He nimbly put on his clothes and then slowly helped Jingwan put on her clothes. Because he was very slow, he completely hid the unfamiliarity of wearing clothes for the first time. Instead, it was a kind of mood. Dawdling out, Jingwan's face was still flushed. The servant girls all had their heads down, as if they didn't know what had happened. Your Highness, do you need this concubine to help you change your clothes? Jingwan asked with a bit of teasing. No need to trouble Your Highness. There was nothing wrong with his words, but his eyes were very explicit. Jingwan's skills were far from his. When Qing Shi and Qing Ci heard this, they directly went forward to help Jingwan change her clothes, leaving their master to the side. Jingwan slightly narrowed her eyes but did not refuse. She opened her arms. Jingwan's servant girls were a bit stunned. They looked at each other in dismay. They couldn't be asked to wait on the prince, right? While they were hesitating, Li Hongyuan took his own clothes and unhurriedly put them on. His movements were not unnatural. When Jingwan saw this for the first time, she was a bit surprised. If she wore her own clothes, she would not be able to do it to this degree. More or less, she would have to ask someone else to tidy her up. Li Hongyuan did not need to do this at all. Jingwan's servant girls let out a sigh of relief. At this time, they were not preparing to enter the palace, so they were wearing ordinary clothes. Jingwan's hair was also only combed into a simple bun. When breakfast was served, this time it was Qing Fu. He directly went to Jingwan's side and prepared to serve her breakfast. Li Hongyuan's side did not need to be tangled up. Mu Gonggong was there. In the past, when it was needed, it was Mu Gonggong who entered the room to serve Li Hongyuan. Now it was not possible. Even if he was a castrate, he was still half a man. How could Li Hongyuan endure it? Jingwan waved her hand at Qing Fu. I'll do it myself, no need to serve. Qing Fu retreated, and Eunuch Mu also retreated without his master's instructions. This was really too interesting. Everything seemed to follow Jin Qinhuang Fei's lead. It seemed that all the servants were Jingwan's. Only Jin Qinhuang seemed to be the one who married in, and he was still single. Jingwan smiled and picked up the serving chopsticks to serve Li Hongyuan. Don't know what Wang Ye likes to eat. If there's anything you don't like, please tell Chia directly. Slowly discovering and understanding things bit by bit through future meals was just a way to get a more detailed understanding. As for the things that he really didn't like, he should have said it directly from the beginning to reduce the possibility of estrangement from the beginning. The things that Ben Wang doesn't like, the kitchen doesn't dare to serve. Li Hongyuan was also simple and direct. Jingwan nodded in understanding. It was indeed so. There's only you and me at the table. Wan can directly use her own chopsticks. I don't mind at all. He picked up a small crystal bun to eat and deliberately put it in his mouth. He also picked up one for Jingwan. Serving chopsticks? What was that? Jingwan glanced at him and did not change chopsticks. After eating, they withdrew and sat for a while before preparing to enter the palace. Jingwan felt that it was necessary for her to know more about her husband's relatives. After all, there would be a lot of dealings in the future. Li Hongyuan was simple and crude. Don't worry about them. Do what you should do. Jingwan was speechless. Then what about Gui Fei Nyang Yang? Xia is a very good mufei. Li Hongyuan said with a bit of profound meaning. Chapter 240. She is a very good mother. Li Hongyuan said rather meaningfully, as far as a loving mother is concerned, she is definitely the best among all the concubines, especially when it comes to treating her daughter-in-law. There is probably no mother-in-law better than her. Li Hongming has never had a son. She has always been comforting and persuading third sister-in-law. She has never intended to make Li Hongming a concubine, so as not to put pressure on third sister-in-law. But third sister-in-law felt ashamed and personally found a woman who could give birth to a child for Li Hongming. Jingwan looked at Li Hongyuan, her new husband, who had a faint smile on his face. She rolled her eyes slightly after hearing his words. Then what should I do, Your Highness? What should I do? Isn't there a saying that a white filial piety is better than a white filial piety? My mother is so kind. As her daughter-in-law, you naturally have to comply with everything. You can't disobey her like third sister-in-law. Jingwan understood, but she showed a little hesitation. What if I'm too obedient and make noble consort feel that I'm a piece of dough? Maybe her attitude towards me will be the opposite of her attitude towards third sister-in-law. Compared with Prince Rue, Your Highness is even emptier. Your Highness takes pity on me, but after a long time we will reach that point. The two of them were truly one now. How far they would go in the future would largely depend on her husband's attitude. Jingwan didn't mind opening up some things now, even if there was a gap between them, or even if they started to walk on the path of strangers, she didn't mind. Well, in terms of habits and hobbies, she would rather eliminate the source from the beginning. But when it came to the things she cared about, she mercilessly revealed them. She was indeed a selfish person. Li Hongyuan reached out and pulled Jingwan into his arms. He was a little angry and a little distressed. But her heart couldn't calm down, which only meant that he had done far enough. What happened to taking her husband as her everything? Wan has always been a quick-witted person. Why can't she be more flexible now? When you know that Imperial Mother is being sarcastic as her daughter-in-law, you naturally have the responsibility to maintain her kind image. You have to correct her righteously. Don't be as silly as third sister-in-law. You can't tell whether Imperial Mother is being sarcastic or not. Jingwan looked at Li Hongyuan with an embarrassed expression. Imperial consort, did you know that your youngest son was so filial? Jingwan could already foresee the scene of noble consort Su fuming with anger. Although she probably wouldn't do it in front of her, wouldn't it be even more sullen? However, she was worried that noble consort Su would secretly want to kill her if she attracted so much hatred. As the sandwich biscuit Jin Qinhuang, should he help his old mother or help his wife? Jingwan glanced at a certain person. He was the one who told her to do it. Therefore, even if he wasn't on her side on the surface, he should be helping her in the dark. As for noble consort Su, didn't she say that she was a loving mother and a good mother-in-law? Would she tear up her own beautiful image and be mean to her? Not to mention anything else, the emperor would probably treat her differently. Therefore her own safety was still assured. Thus it didn't matter. However, wasn't it said that Jin Wang didn't give face to anyone and didn't show any mercy? Was it only noble consort Su who could make him compromise and soften his attitude? Wasn't it said that noble consort Su treated her biological son the same as her adopted son? Sometimes she even slightly favored her adopted son? Wasn't it said that noble consort Su and Jin Wang's motherly love and filial piety made the emperor a bit jealous? What kind of place was the imperial palace? How many eyes were watching? Was it true or false? It could deceive one or two people, but could it deceive everyone? Therefore these rumors should be true. Even if it was a disguise, it should be countless times better than Ruan Fangfei's. After all, how could a super mansion like the imperial palace be compared to a small family like the Ruan family? The fake must be real. Jingwan thought like this and waved away the servants to ask her questions. Li Hongyuan buried his head in her neck and rubbed it. It was a bit ticklish. Jingwan shrunk her neck and pushed him away. Let's talk about serious matters. Or are you saying that you can't tell me? I've already said that there's nothing about me that I can't tell you. It's undeniable that she is indeed very good to me. It's not the so-called making a fake show real, it's really good. I used to think of her as my biological mother for a time. However, even 10 million good can't withstand one or two bad things. When I was 10 years old, she did one thing. When I was 13 years old, she did another thing. Two things were enough to erase everything. Do you know what it was? It was. Li Hongyuan smiled and said a few words as if he didn't care. Jingwan's pupils shrank. You. It seemed to be an understatement, but Jingwan still sensed that he cared. However, after thinking about it, people were not plants and could not be emotionless. No matter how cruel and heartless a person was, there was still a soft spot in their heart. Imagine, a mother who had been meticulously caring for her for more than 20 years. No matter how picky you were, no matter how much you looked at her with colored glasses, you couldn't find anything bad about her. In fact, when you found out, there might be a kind of heart-wrenching pain. Li Hongyuan hugged Jingwan. I'm fine. Jingwan didn't know how to comfort him. However, after so many years he should have already gotten over it. And she couldn't say that. This living king of hell might have been provoked by imperial consort Su. However, you were able to find out when you were 10 years old. That's amazing. Li Hongyuan couldn't help but laugh. He was actually not amazing at all. After all, in his previous life he had been tricked and didn't know anything for a long time. In this life, it was only because he had foresight that he could easily avoid it. In fact, when he was 10 years old, he didn't mention it. He just happened to come back at that time. When he was 13 years old, he actually gave her a chance to see if she would restrain herself. Unfortunately, she still did it. Then, he enjoyed her motherly love without any psychological burden and enjoyed the benefits that she brought to him. He also didn't hold back and punished her son. Then he ended her son's bloodline. He found out one day. Li Hongyuan chuckled. He was looking forward to how that good imperial consort mother would break down. After knowing the true relationship between this mother and son, Jingwan felt no pressure in her heart. She even had a faint sense of anticipation. What was there to be angry about? They weren't her own people, nor were they innocent people. Even if it was Jingwan, she didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt. The two changed their clothes. They were dressed in the imperial robes of a prince and the formal attire of a prince consort. They were dressed in the most solemn manner. According to Li Hongyuan, he didn't intend to do this. How shameless were those people to deserve such treatment from him? Moreover, it was still early. Who would be willing to waste time in the palace? Jingwan said jokingly, I'm going to make a good impression and let them be grateful to me. Because I'm keeping a leash on you, the living king of hell, and there's a tendency for you to become obedient. Then, when I make a mistake, their tolerance will also increase by 3 points. Li Hongyuan rubbed his chin. Wanwan is right. We should let them know how good you are and praise you to the heavens. Jingwan was speechless. She was really just joking. Did he take it seriously? Would he deliberately do certain things more thoroughly just to cooperate with her, and then drag her to put out the fire at the critical moment? Jingwan would never have thought that she had guessed correctly. And there was a group of people who probably wouldn't have thought that someone would trample them to death for his wife. Chapter 241. The living king of hell had finished his plan. Now, he had to start preparing to raise his wife into a national treasure. The Qinhuang ceremonial procession left Jin Qinhuang Fu. In the past, it was always Li Hongyuan alone, but now there was someone sitting side by side with him. From now on, they would always be together. They would walk through sweet happiness together, and would also walk through difficulties and hardships together. Although his heart still couldn't be completely at ease, Li Hongyuan hugged Jingwan. At least for this moment he was satisfied. After getting off the carriage, Li Hongyuan refused the sedan and just openly pulled Jingwan's hand, heading towards the depths of the palace. Jingwan wanted to pull her hand back several times, but she didn't succeed. We are newly married. It's natural for us to be intimate, Li Hongyuan righteously said. Jingwan looked at him speechlessly. The intimacy between husband and wife could only be done in private. The common people paid attention to rules and propriety. One must be reserved. Pulling and pulling like this in broad daylight was simply a disgrace to refinement. Well, Jingwan had actually expected this day to come. Being together with this kind of thick-skinned person, the first thing one needed to train was to be thick-skinned. After it was fruitless, Jingwan also let him pull her. If it really turned into pulling and pulling, then it would be shameful. Li Hongyuan didn't seem to be in a hurry at all. His mood was very good as he walked slowly with Jingwan. In any case, according to his intentions, his old man's government affairs hadn't been completely dealt with, so he couldn't be seen at this time. As for noble consort Su, as a loving mother, she should naturally understand her son's joy of finally having a wife and not bicker with him. Therefore, when noble consort Su found out that her son had entered the palace with the newly appointed daughter-in-law, at the beginning, she was still lamenting with the other concubines and another daughter-in-law in her palace. Having a daughter-in-law was different. In the past, when she occasionally went to court, she had never entered the palace so early. Unfortunately, it had already been more than an hour, and there was still no sign of him. Noble consort Su was a little uneasy, and she was a little embarrassed. This was simply a classic example of forgetting one's mother after having a wife. She had always been able to control her son, whom even Luqing Emperor couldn't control. She believed that her position in her son's heart was the most important. However, on the first day her daughter-in-law entered the family, she seemed to have given her a slap. To be honest, noble consort Su was a little angry. Princess Lu lowered her head and drank the tea as if she hadn't noticed anything. Li Hongyuan and Jingwan, who were preparing to go to the Jade Essence Palace, were directly summoned by Luqing Emperor. However, Luqing Emperor's mood was not so good. It was because Li Hongyuan showed a little talent yesterday, which made him vigilant and even felt that he had been cheated. He even had the words written by Li Hongyuan in his hand. It was originally just ordinary handwriting, but now there were too many memorials that had passed through Luqing's hands. Naturally, there were countless good handwriting among them. Even though he had been trained in this aspect for a long time, when he saw Li Hongyuan's handwriting, he couldn't help but praise it, but then his face darkened. For others, it might not be a big deal, but in the eyes of a suspicious emperor, it naturally became a conspiracy theory again. After Li Hongyuan and Jingwan knelt down and kowtowed to Luqing Emperor, he didn't call them up as Li Hongyuan usually did. He didn't scold them with anger on the surface. Instead, he looked at them condescendingly. Of course, he mainly focused on Li Hongyuan, secretly evaluating and sizing him up. Li Hongyuan was never a good son who would obediently accept if you didn't speak. He met Luqing Emperor's gaze directly. "Father, if you have something to say, just say it. I brought my wife to serve you tea. If you are unhappy, just say it. It's not an eyesore. It's just that your new daughter-in-law doesn't like you and is always inferior to others. At worst, she will go out less. Now that things have come to this, you embarrass me and your new daughter-in-law. What's going on?" The servants in the study kept quiet out of fear. Jingwan, who lowered her head, looked thoughtful. Speaking of which, in the face of such a son, Luqing Emperor seemed to subconsciously weaken. However, there were still some things that needed to be clarified. "I'm just curious. Sixth brother, your handwriting has improved rapidly recently. I can't even recognize it." Li Hongyuan sneered. "I have nothing to do all day. I just practice a few words. After practicing for more than 10 years, if I haven't made any progress, how stupid can I be? It's just that some people hope that Heir Qin is stupid. Does Father Emperor really think that Heir Qin is stupid? When Heir Qin gets married, the words Li Hongyuan doesn't deserve are written on each and every one of their faces. Do you really think that Heir Qin doesn't have a temper?" Jingwan silently cursed. "If you don't have a temper, then it's estimated that everyone in the world would become sheep." However, it should be said that Jin Qinhuang was worthy of being a capable person who could lead Luqing Emperor by the nose. Quietly gaining the upper hand by a show of strength, Luqing Emperor's anger weakened a bit. However, this son of his was so intelligent when he was young. Because he saw through his thoughts, he restrained himself. This son was so well behaved. Even if his temper was a bit big as a prince, how could he not have a temper? This time, It was purely because his son's self-esteem was seriously damaged that he angrily took action. This son was excluded from the position of heir to the throne. In the end it was his own fault, so he felt even more guilty. My son has been wronged. Li Hongyuan glanced at Luqing Emperor, his eyes full of ridicule and disdain. Heir Chen is not a 3-year-old child. It's just that Heir Chen's wife's tea. Does Fu Huang drink it? Drink, 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 how can I not drink it? Zhen has waited for your wife's tea for many years. I was once worried that I wouldn't be able to drink it. The attendant very perceptively hurriedly prepared the tea in front of Jingwan. Jingwan took the tea and respectfully raised it. Fu Huang, please drink the tea. Good, good, good. It must be said that Luqing Emperor was very satisfied with Jingwan. Of course, he would never think that his son was not worthy of her. In his eyes, the son of his beloved woman, no matter how bad he was, could still be worthy of the best girl in the world. After the attendant presented the tea, he took a sip. Lao Lu's wife Zhen's son will be handed over to you in the future. This evil creature's temper is a bit bad, please bear with it in the future. Jingwan pursed her lips and smiled. Wang Ye is very good. That's good, that's good. So this was how people were. They could casually scold, ridicule, and even beat their own children. But if others said bad, they would definitely be unhappy. If others said good, they would feel honored. They would give a lot of rewards. Then his eyes turned and he said casually, since Lao Lu is already married, shouldn't you do well in the future to share Zhen's worries? Li Hongyuan sneered in his heart. No matter how nice his words sounded, he was still worried in his heart. There are many brothers who share Imperial Father's worries. Heir Chen is used to being lazy. I'm afraid that I can't share Imperial Father's worries and will only cause trouble. My son, you're belittling yourself. Heir Chen is annoyed and doesn't have the patience to do things, alright? Luqing Emperor was helpless. Zhen doesn't know what to say to you. Since that's the case, forget it. Jingwan could see that her Imperial Father treated her husband in the same way as noble consort Su. They thought that their son was a treasure. In the eyes of outsiders he was also a treasure. But in Jingwan's eyes he was no different from a blade of grass. They had deprived him of the most important things, and then carried out the so-called compensation. They were giving him sweet dates, but at the same time they were beating him to death. That kind of heart-wrenching pain was worse than not giving anything. After all, without the sweetness of receiving, there would be no pain of losing. Without the emotional investment, one would not be hurt to the point where one's body was covered in cuts and bruises. She could not blame her husband for being a living king of hell. She could not blame her husband for being black-hearted. He was forced to do it. And the person who forced him to this point did not have the slightest awareness. She even bitterly lamented that he had grown up crooked. On the way to the imperial harem, Jingwan took the initiative to hold Li Hongyuan's hand and whispered, Wang Ye, if you don't betray me, we will never leave each other in this life. Li Hongyuan was amused. Did Wan sympathize with him? But Wan is also a selfish person. There are conditions for not leaving each other. Why can't you stay by my side no matter what? Then I'll have to disappoint Wang Ye. Wan, with your personality, you can't do it sometimes. There are some things that you can't say. Saying it won't do you any good. If it were someone else who said those words just now, you would most likely be left alone in your room. Then will Wang Ye do that? Jingwan stared at him. He won't. So it's okay to say it in front of Wang Ye? I believe Wang Ye. Li Hongyuan chuckled. That was why Wan could always easily grasp his emotions. However, even though he had fallen into her hands for 2 lifetimes, he was willing to endure it. He leaned over and planted a light kiss on her lips. Knowing that there was something wrong with this place, Jingwan didn't avoid it this time. She didn't even look around to see if she was seen. This kind of relationship gradually brought their hearts closer to each other. This kind of feeling was actually not bad. Li Hongyuan felt that he had more patience to completely capture Jingwan's heart. Speaking of which, as the head of the imperial harem, the empress was happy to become the emperor's legal wife. If it was an ordinary family, even if the son of a concubine got married, there was no reason for him to serve tea to his own concubine. After all, the imperial harem was a special place. There were many people who received a cup of tea from the bride. As a son of a concubine, as long as the status of his birth mother or adoptive mother was high enough, the first person to serve tea might not be the empress. Of course, it was more customary to start with the empress. Li Hongyuan sent Jingwan to the Jade Essence Palace, which was not unexpected at all. However, seeing Jingwan in a big dress, the people in the Jade Essence Palace, including noble consort Su, were all stunned. Princess Lu in particular, felt that it was a mistake to wear a princess's dress to the palace today. Not to mention that she wanted to suppress others. In fact, after being a princess for several years, she couldn't suppress a maid who just got married in terms of bearing. It was like being slapped in the face. It was burning pain. No matter what grade of dress it was, the most important thing was to be dignified and elegant. However, this dress depended on temperament. Some people, even if they wore a dragon robe, would not look like a crown prince. It was the same principle. Generally speaking, Jingwan was not fully mature yet, so this kind of dress was not suitable for her. Secondly, she had not experienced the influence of the corresponding status, so it was difficult for her to have a bearing that matched her status. Therefore, when she got married for the first time, it was difficult for her to completely suppress the dress and let the dress serve as a foil. Jingwan was young, but she suppressed it. Her words and actions were not unnatural at all, as if she was born to be like this. After all, it was the same dress, so it was natural for people to subconsciously compare it. Therefore, everyone present could see it. Then, those who had nothing to do with it silently lowered their heads. Well, before Jingwan came in, no one felt that it was wrong for Princess Lu to dress like this, nor did they feel that there was anything wrong with showing off to their sister-in-law. However, when the effect was completely opposite to what they expected, it was embarrassing. Noble consort Su also agreed with Madame Lu to suppress Jingwan. It was more or less unpleasant for Jingwan to steal her son. Now she glanced at Princess Lu indifferently, and there was a flash of dissatisfaction in her eyes. When she looked at Li Hongyuan and Jingwan, she put on a natural and sincere smile. "You're here. Hurry up and find a seat for Yuan'er and his wife. Mother, let's serve tea first. It's still early today and we have to go to other palaces. Then we have to worship in the Imperial Ancestral Temple. Next afternoon we have to meet the relatives. I know that you like Jingwan. After today, ask her to come to the palace often to talk to you." Noble consort Su felt her liver hurt, but she couldn't find any fault with what her son said. Yuan'er is right. There will be plenty of time in the future. She asked the servants to quickly serve the prepared tea. Jingwan knelt in front of noble consort Su. "Mother, please drink tea." The aunt next to her took the tea and handed it to noble consort Su. Noble consort Su took a sip and said something like being virtuous and considerate, and having children for the imperial family as soon as possible. She also talked a lot, as if she was caught in some memories that she couldn't extricate herself from. She couldn't stop her eyes from turning red. In short, she kept talking about Yuan'er. In short, he was like her lifeblood and she must take good care of him. No matter how much she said, Li Hongyuan didn't know. He only knew that his wife had been kneeling for a long time. Sure enough, Li Hongming was so good that she had the leisure to embarrass his sweetheart. "Oh child, why are you still kneeling? It's all my fault. I forgot about you for a moment. Hurry up and get up." The palace maids also hurried forward to help her. "Thank you, mother." Jingwan stood up. There were some things that had been done to the extreme, but when talking about it, it was as if she didn't know anything and was sincere. Jingwan thought that she could never reach this height in her life. Noble consort Su also gave a generous reward. As Li Hongyuan said, she was a very good mother-in-law. Even if she let Jingwan kneel for a while, it would never make people feel that she was embarrassed. Jingwan and the others went to Kunyi Palace. When the empress saw Jingwan, she lamented in her heart that it was a pity. The daughter of the Minister of Works was far inferior to her. However, she couldn't find a better candidate. However, the empress wasn't a person who wouldn't let go of this kind of thing. She went through the formalities, gave the rewards and sent the couple away with a smile. Then they went to Qin Shufei's Sweet Dew Palace. Jingwan felt that Qin Shufei treated her much more sincerely than Empress Sun and noble consort Su. Qin Shufei didn't even have any distracting thoughts, which made Jingwan more or less surprised. As for the other concubines, they weren't qualified. After this, it was time to worship the Imperial Ancestral Temple and tell the ancestors that the Li royal family was a little more prosperous. Of course, Jingwan couldn't enter the Imperial Ancestral Temple. There was only one woman who could enter, and that was the Empress. Even the Empress Dowager, if she hadn't been promoted from the Empress, probably hadn't entered once in her life. It was already late when they entered the palace. When they were done, it was time for lunch. Noble consort Su stayed for lunch and Li Qingdi also came. Facing the dishes that needed to be tasted one, by the time they were ready to eat, the hot dishes would have already been cold. And for those dishes that needed to be eaten while they were hot, 99% of them would be wasted. There were all kinds of rules which made her stomach hurt. Li Hongyuan didn't care about it, but he knew Jingwan's appetite. He also knew that she ate regularly. Obviously she couldn't be full. So his face was a little pale. So when Li Qingdi put down his chopsticks he directly got up and left. After leaving the palace, Li Hongyuan had originally planned to take Jingwan to a restaurant outside to have an extra meal. Jingwan was speechless. A Qinhuang Wangfei wearing a Qinhuang ceremonial robe going to a restaurant with a Qinhuang ceremonial guard. What was he doing? Jingwan didn't hesitate to drag him back to the prince's mansion. As a servant, she naturally needed to be alert enough. Jingwan and others arrived at the prince's mansion. After they changed their clothes, the food was already on the table. Jingwan didn't stand on ceremony. She ate happily and quickly. From time to time she put food in Li Hongyuan's bowl. Actually he was serving Jingwan most of the time. He also knew Jingwan's taste like the back of his hand. In fact, watching a person eat so happily was also a kind of enjoyment. With a happy expression and enjoying the process of eating, he had never seen it in his previous life. At that time Jingwan's appetite was not bad. However, eating seemed to be for survival and there was no more meaning to it. Looking at her so lively, it was more delightful. After Jingwan filled her stomach, she realized that her husband didn't seem to have eaten much. He was such a strong man and he couldn't be eaten by a cat. Well, as a wife, wasn't she a little negligent? But the food on the table was her leftovers. Should she change the table? She was a little hesitant. Li Hongyuan smiled and started to eat. Li Hongyuan ate very quickly. Of course, even so, he didn't lose his manners. His appetite was also very good. At the same time, it was obvious that he was actually a carnivore. She didn't see him pick up the vegetables on the table with his chopsticks. This won't do. Jingwan specially picked vegetables for him. Facing Li Hongyuan's raised eyebrows, she smiled and said, "Eat more vegetables to be healthier. Moreover, this concubine suggests that your highness eat slowly." Chewing carefully and swallowing slowly was good for digestion and absorption. Shouldn't pleasing a person be based on the other party's preferences? Your highness wants this concubine to please you, is that all? Forget I said that. Although he preferred meat dishes, it didn't mean that he didn't eat vegetables. Therefore, this lunch ended in a very satisfied atmosphere between the two masters. Li Hongyuan hugged Jingwan and sat for less than half an hour. The spring scenery was good, so he asked someone to set up a bed in the courtyard. Hugging Jingwan, he laid down on it and took an afternoon nap. Jingwan didn't know if it was her imagination, but she felt that a certain someone was a little clingy. Moreover, it seemed to be getting worse. Especially after he fell asleep, he wouldn't let go of her. There was no doubt that if someone tried to snatch her from him while he was sleeping, he would explode and kill them. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.